have just rage quitted from playing Final Fantasy III for the iPod, which I believe is similar to the version that's on the DS version. While I hope to one day make a proper review of the game, I still wanted to give my thoughts on it. I haven't played through the game completely yet, which again is probably implied by the fact that I just rage quitted. I've only made it as far as the Temple of Time, and yeah, I think you might. I'm pretty sure those of you who have played Final Fantasy 13, no, not 13, Final Fantasy 3, sorry. Final Fantasy 13 is also a terrible game, but that is the subject of a different video altogether. So, Final Fantasy 3. There are a few good things about it. For example, in the DS version as compared to the NES version, the story is actually a little bit better in that, well, the four characters are actually characters, unique characters. You have Luneth, Ark, Refia, and the soldier guy. Or what's his name? His name escapes me. Well, they all have unique personalities and backstories, which can be a bit troublesome considering that I've somehow made Refia a level behind because of her refusal to go into her hometown until after I was able to get the airship going. And there's also the job system, which has 24 various job systems. Well, 24 various jobs that your characters can take. The advertisements said 23, but I discovered the 24th, which is Onion Knight. And I still have no idea what an Onion Knight does, other than what I heard, which is that an Onion Knight is pretty much the best class if you are at a very high level, as in level 99. Doesn't really seem worth it to me. So while the plot and all that is fun, I need to address about why I don't like Final Fantasy III as a game. First off, there is the magic system that is used in the game, in which case, for those who don't know, Final Fantasy III uses Final Fantasy III for the DS version is essentially the same thing as what you might find in Pathfinder, which would be a spell charge system. How a spell charge system works is that when you have a character who is capable of performing magic, a character can perform several different levels of magic for a certain number of times a day, with the lower level spells being able to be cast more times per day than the higher level spells. And while that might actually provide an interesting aspect of the gameplay, which is that you have to conserve your spell charges for when you really need it, in which case, outside of a boss battle, when would you actually know you are in real need for spell charges? That's one problem that, well, a bit of a nitpick that I have with the spell charge systems for for RPGs in general that use spell charge systems. And what I don't like about spell charge systems is that you are limited to using spell charges a day or until you are able to recharge spells. In Final Fantasy III, you can recharge spells by either sleeping, which you can do so by sleeping at an inn, or by drinking water from a magical fountain, or being revived by a magical fountain, which is nice and all, except that magical fountains are usually only found in cities, and in the inns outside of the floating continent in the game are really expensive. It's not really much of a problem once you get an airship which would take you back to the floating continent where you can rest up or have easier access to refilling your HP and spell charges, but it can be time consuming. And I don't like how higher level spells can only be cast a few times a day, while lower level spells can be cast even more so. When you're further into the game, you pretty much run into the problem of having low spell charges, which are not very effective at all. In other words, you can cast them as many times as you want, but you're going to either have a very long battle or you're likely to die before you even win the battle using low level spell charges exclusively. From what I understand, the NES version of Final Fantasy I also used the spell charge version, but having played the version for the iPod, which uses an MP version of Magic, it's actually a lot better than spell charge systems. Because at least when you're later on in the game, you can make your White Wizard cast Holy as many times as you want, rather than being able to cast Holy 5 times in your current level, which might be 40 or whatever. So spell charges are certainly not to my preferences. And now for the real problems of Final Fantasy III. While the job change system is a novel concept, especially for its time, I found that the DS version that I played actively punishes you for actually taking advantage of the feature. When you change a job from let's say fighter to black mage, you have to fight a certain number of battles before the attribute penalty is undone. So changing jobs is not really an effective means for combat unless you do a lot of grinding to increase the job levels to a higher point so that it would reduce the number of battles it takes. Except that when your characters are in a higher level, random encounters for lower level monsters become very, very rare or decrease. And I think this leads me to my next point about about why Final Fantasy III for the DS is not very well done, it would have to be the fact that you have to grind for an extremely long time. You have to grind in order to get a high job level, and you have to grind to get a high character level. At the point of the game where I am the Temple of Time, it took me a long time, about an hour or two. Well, 2 hours might be exaggerating, but it took me a long time to level grind from level 28 to level 31. And I've done that by going underwater and fighting random enemies, which is not really too difficult given that water type enemies are weak to electricity, obviously. And except that when you are in the Temple of Time, the battles are much harder, but the experience and items you get do not make the battles really worthwhile. In fact, it kind of makes the battles inside the Temple of Time a huge waste of time. With grinding underwater, you might end up having to encounter 3 enemies at a time, and on average, you would end up gaining about 1,500 experience points per encounter on average. In the Temple of Time, when you have to fight enemies for a very long time, you might only get about 800 experience. The Dira is an enemy that really ticks me off for that reason, because Adira has a ridiculously high amount of HP, and all physical attacks pretty much do about half the physical damage, practically, between half and 3/4 if you're lucky. And while Viras are weak to the arrow spell, the arrow spell is incredibly weak as a white magic spell. You are able to get a stronger arrow spell, but that is a really high level spell, which would require the use of a very high level spell charge. And when you're level 31 or 32, you do not want to use up higher spell charges, which again is why I prefer the MP system, because when you use MP points to spend on spells, you can spam higher level spells as many times as you want, and as long as you are able to replenish them, and the spells you would cast would therefore be more effectively used. And before having to grind to level 31, I was at level 28. I entered, and goodness, the encounter rate was really high. Not sure if the programmers made it that way so that if you are a lower level, you end up having a high encounter rate, in which case, why? Why would you make lower level characters have a higher encounter rate and high level characters have a lower encounter rate when you want to grind? Particularly if you wish to grind all the way to level 99. I realize I'm rambling. So at the very bottom level of the Temple of Time, you encounter very powerful enemies. I've encountered that really huge blue beast. Took me forever to kill it, and the experience was not even worth it. I got about 15,000 experience, even though I've been able to get just as much experience with grinding underwater in the submarine. And a lot of spell charges were spent in that battle. While underwater, you would probably only have to spend 1 or 2 spell charges for Thundara, maybe, in order to defeat your enemies. I spent a long time trying to figure out what the weaknesses are, because I don't really want to use a scholar, because again, the job change system in the DS version punishes you for changing into other jobs. So it's not really worth it to change into a scholar. And yeah. So basically, my main problems with the DS version of Final Fantasy III are with the, trying to think, spell charge system, which is not really a personal preference of mine. I'm pretty sure other players might enjoy it. I've seen it being used in tabletop RPGs a lot, so other people might not really have a problem with it. Even though I personally think the MP system is much better. There is also the job change system in the DS version, which punishes you for changing jobs. In which case, why even advertise the job change system as being an integral part to the game? I mean, there are some points in the plot where you have to change jobs, but even then, that's pretty much the only reason why I would change and have to put up with having to battle and grind and all that. And thirdly, oh yes, before I forget, some of the spells that you use, most particularly the spells that cause status ailments, they rarely work on enemies. Sleep does not really work. Instant death spells like Break do not really work, although in the DS version, Break does not really cause an instant death so much as damage on certain enemies. I have yet to find out if I can petrify something. And Mini seldomly works, which is slightly better than rarely. Toad never works. And Silence also barely works. Sometimes. And even then, it doesn't really stop the effects that could happen to you if an enemy performs a physical attack and cause status ailments that way. So cockatrices can still stun you if you if they attack you with their physical attacks, silence doesn't really do anything about it. So, yeah. And yet somehow enemies can cast the same spells, and you're very and you would be very likely to do that. Well, you're very likely to get harmed by it. Your characters would be very likely to get harmed. And really, Final Fantasy III is frustrating. If you're going to make me grind for hours and hours, at least give me bonus dungeons to grind. At least the Dawn of Souls version of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 that I played had bonus dungeons that I could use. It really works for Final Fantasy 2, considering that it is attribute skill grinding thing that's different, and it actually still levels you up in the dungeons, in the bonus dungeons. So that's really worth the time. In Final Fantasy 3, grinding is just boring, and it's barely worth any time. And as I said, it took me a long time to grind from level 28 to 31 or 32, and I've barely been able to survive the Temple of Time, unless either running away doesn't work, or I get back attacked. Both of these ways, I've been able to get my characters killed because the three purple chimera things cast lightning on me 3 times. It's frustrating. If I have to be at a higher level to go through the Temple of Time, again, why do I have to put up with such a boring process such as grinding? And if you're going to make me grind for experience, at least give me incentive to do so. Give me new places to explore. At this point, I am fully aware that I am rambling, so I will wish you all good night, and hopefully in the future I will be able to make a proper review of Final Fantasy III and all the other Final Fantasy games. So, until then, I am Baron Imagino Umphris. You may call me Baron Imagino, or if you want to call me something resembling a regular name, Gino. Have a good night.